There is not a single good thing about our country that we would not have if not for Islam. And if you doubt that, then go ahead and give me an example of the great gift that Islam has given to this country since its founding.
Has he never heard of the golden age of Islam, which helped fuel the Renaissance and the Enlightenment in Europe, which of course then helped produce the American founding fathers?
From the moment Matt Walsh declares that Islam has contributed nothing to America, the weakness of his argument becomes immediately clear. It's the kind of sweeping claim that only survives when no one in the room knows any history. But when Mehdi Hasan steps in, the tone changes. He doesn't respond with outrage. He responds with facts that reshape the entire conversation. He starts with the most undeniable point. Enslaved people built the physical foundations of the United States, and a significant portion of them were Muslims. Roads, ports, early infrastructure, and even parts of Washington's most iconic buildings were constructed through the labor of people whose identities Walsh casually erases. That alone undermines his assertion, but Hasan doesn't stop there. He goes further, connecting America's intellectual roots to the global legacy of Islamic scholarship. The scientific and philosophical breakthroughs of the Islamic Golden Age helped shape the European Renaissance, which in turn influenced the Enlightenment, a movement that profoundly shaped America's founding thinkers. Walsh may not like that connection, but historical reality doesn't bend to his preferences. What makes this moment so revealing is the contrast in approaches. Walsh relies on loud certainty, Hasan relies on documented truth. And when presented side by side, the cracks in Walsh's certainty become glaring. His rhetoric isn't built on knowledge, it's built on the assumption that no one will challenge him. Hasan shows that when you introduce real history into the conversation, the talking points fall apart. This exchange sets the tone for everything that follows. One figure leaning on emotion and erasure, and another grounding the discussion in verifiable reality. And when that reality is laid out so clearly, there's nowhere for Walsh's argument. Before we dive into the full story, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, all that in mind, let's walk through the clips to the show, and along the way I will break down not just what was said, but what was really going on in the next studio. Now let's get into it.
There is not a single good thing about our country that we would not have if not for Islam. And if you doubt that, then go ahead and give me an example of the great gift that Islam has given to this country since its founding.
Has he never heard of the golden age of Islam, which helped fuel the Renaissance and the Enlightenment in Europe, which of course then helped produce the American founding fathers? We need to talk about Matt Walsh. And if you're asking Matt who, then I'm truly envious of you. Normally I wouldn't waste time responding to basically an internet troll, but Matt is so emblematic of everything that is wrong with the modern MAGA right. Faux outrage, self-victimization, verbal abuse, a walking, talking Dunning-Kruger. Now, Matt Walsh, who says he's a conservative Christian, is upset with me for being a Muslim and for being an immigrant, but above all else for being an American. That he cannot stand. So he did an entire 13-minute video calling me a spiteful, lying, self-entitled brat, on top of his tweet in which he called me an ungrateful little bitch, just as Jesus would have said. Now, before we get into the substance of Matt's claims, if we can even call it that, before we get into what I said about Muslims and the founding of America, a little bit of background on who Matt Walsh is. Shock jock podcaster, former radio DJ, and now basically that Daily Wire guy who isn't Ben Shapiro. He's also the guy who hasn't got the greatest of political judgment. He went all in on Ron DeSantis in the GOP primary and then had to come crawling back to Trump when DeSantis got destroyed, as some of us predicted he would. Matt is also the guy who said COVID wasn't a big deal, that, quote, it's totally irrational to panic over this virus. He later admitted he got it wrong. But here's my favorite. Matt was so bothered by a black woman playing Ariel in the Little Mermaid movie that he actually said this.
From a scientific perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have someone with darker skin who lives deep in the ocean.
There are no words to describe how dumb you have to be to try and make scientific arguments about the skin color of mermaids, which are fictional fucking characters, Matt. This is the guy who millions on the right turn to for intellectual guidance, historical analysis, and thought leadership. Then you wonder why this country is so screwed. By the way, just quickly, consistency isn't really his thing either. In May of this year, he said identifying as a girl dad is super cringe and corny. In 2020, though, he said being a girl dad is a great blessing. He constantly complains about political violence and death threats when they're aimed at him, but he's happy to dish it out to the people he doesn't like. He's called for the mayor of Chicago, a black man, to be executed. He's called for Jimmy Kimmel, a comedian, to be arrested. He once said this, too.
But it is in fact true that you have to make people hurt. And I'm sorry, but holding signs and yelling loudly will not make anyone hurt.
You have to make people hurt. Now, what's really bothering him about me is that I said in a recent visit to Dearborn,
I think that if you can play church bells, you can pray the call to prayer.
isn't it okay for Muslim Americans to broadcast a call to prayer? I mean, let me add right now, within reason, of course, and in accordance with all local sound and noise ordinances. But Matt went nuts and said Christianity built this country. Islam did not at all in even the slightest way. That's why we can have our church bells. To which I responded, 1 in 3 of the slaves who built this country were Muslims. They were here long before the Walsh family arrived. You'd know that if you'd studied history, but I know MAGA has an issue with studying. To which Matt responded with a 13-minute video in which he got really mad, but was unable to rebut the 2 central points that I made. Number 1, enslaved people helped build this country. And number 2, perhaps up to 1 in 3 of those slaves were Muslims. Matt can't rebut that because it's true, according to historians, according to the African American History Museum, according to the US State Department. Muslim slaves are a historical fact. As his boss Ben Shapiro has famously declaimed, facts don't care about your feelings, Matt. It's not my fault if they didn't teach you about slavery in high school. In his video, Matt Walsh sounds like a Monty Python sketch. What did the slaves ever do for us? Ignoring the railways, the roads, the ports, the literal seat of our government, the White House and the Capitol, all built by enslaved people. And 1 in 3 of them, remember, being Muslims, black African Muslims. Matt is also just completely clueless about the Muslims who fought in the Revolutionary War, in the War of 1812, in the Civil War, where most of them fought in the Union Army. But then again, Matt's been pictured wearing a Confederate t-shirt, so maybe he's mad that the Muslims fought against the Confederacy. He even issues this challenge to me.
If Islam had ceased to exist 300 years ago, this country would not have lost a single thing. There is not a single good thing about our country that we would not have if not for Islam. And if you doubt that, then go ahead and give me an example of the great gift that Islam has given to this country since its founding.
Has he never heard of the golden age of Islam, which helped fuel the Renaissance and the Enlightenment in Europe, which of course then helped produce the American founding fathers? Has he ever gotten off of the internet and read a book? But look, I'm happy to fill the gaps in his education. He asked me to explain what Islam or Muslims have done for America. I mean, the black Muslim slaves aside, more recently, how about the planning of the moon landings? That was a Muslim American scientist and immigrant. How about the science behind modern skyscrapers? That was a Muslim American engineer and immigrant. How about brain tumor treatment? That was a Muslim American neurosurgeon and immigrant. Just this year, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry went to, among others, a Palestinian American Muslim immigrant whose research Matt could never possibly understand and whose work could help tackle man-made climate change, which Matt doesn't believe in. Because Matt Walsh's knowledge of science is right up there with his knowledge of history.
As the debate continues, the focus shifts from historical fact to the character behind the rhetoric. Mehdi Hasan begins highlighting something many people have noticed about Matt Walsh. His commentary isn't driven by principle, but by whatever keeps his audience agitated. The contradictions are everywhere. Walsh denounces political violence when he feels threatened, yet encourages harm toward those he disagrees with. He lectures others about morality while defending or dismissing extreme positions. He criticizes cultural trends one year and embraces them the next. This pattern isn't accidental, it's strategic. Outrage is the fuel, and consistency isn't required. Another striking example is Walsh's attempt to use pseudoscience to criticize a black actress playing Ariel in The Little Mermaid. Instead of acknowledging it as fiction, he tries to invent scientific arguments to justify discomfort. It's a glimpse into how he constructs many of his talking points, confidently, emotionally, and without much research behind them. Hasan then delivers one of the sharpest contrasts. He openly acknowledges he said harmful things in his early 20s and has apologized repeatedly. He changed. Walsh, however, still holds similar views today, not as a young man learning, but as a grown adult shaping political commentary for millions. The difference isn't just ideological, it's developmental. This phase of the exchange reveals that Walsh's arguments crumble not only under factual scrutiny, but under moral scrutiny as well. When someone's positions shift based on convenience rather than conviction, their credibility dissolves. Hasan exposes that pattern with precision, showing that Walsh's commentary rests more on performance than principle.
What does he do? The guy who can't rebut basic facts. He attacks me. He goes after me for a speech I gave nearly 2 decades ago, which I said awful, dumb, bigoted things about the gay community, about non-Muslims, which I've regretted, disowned, apologized for multiple times over the decade. He thinks it's a gotcha. But here's the problem for Matt. What I said back then are essentially Matt Walsh's views right now. Matt is an anti-gay bigot today. In fact, Matt supports a Uganda law imprisoning gay people. I don't. Matt thinks most pop music is satanic. I don't. What I stupidly said nearly 20 years ago in my 20s, Matt basically says today, aged almost 40. Oh, and if you're going to play the game of what were you saying in embarrassing videos decades ago, here's what Matt Walsh was saying in 2010.
But to all of a sudden act like this phenomenon of girls getting pregnant at a young age that we consider young, 16 or 17, to act like it's a new thing is ridiculous. It's always been that way. Girls between the ages of like 17 and 24 is when they're technically most fertile.
That's pretty gross, pretty disgusting. I think we can all agree. And also kind of creepy. A 25-year-old man telling his audience how fertile 17-year-old girls are? What is wrong with you, man? I mean, it's also ironic that the right are obsessed with smearing Muslims as child molesters and saying Islam supports child marriage, and yet here is Matt on tape saying that about 17-year-old girls, about children. So, look, to conclude, who is more American? The guy who supports free and fair elections, me, or the guy who got mad when judges locked up violent insurrectionists who tried to overturn the 2020 election, Matt Walsh? Who is more American, the guy who supports the First Amendment and free speech, me, or the guy who wants to imprison people and deport people for their speech, Matt Walsh? Who is more American, the guy who supports the United States, me, or the guy who wore a t-shirt celebrating the violent traitors of the Confederacy, Matt Walsh? Who is more American, the guy who supports religious pluralism and separation of church and state as intended by the founders, me, or the guy who wants Christian nationalism in America and proudly calls himself a theocratic fascist, Matt Walsh? Yeah, I think I've made the case that I'm much more of an American and much more of a patriotic American than you are, Matt. And you're just going to have to go whine and cry about it.
The final phase of this debate moves beyond individual claims and towards something far larger, the struggle over what America is supposed to represent. For generations, Americans were taught that the country was a melting pot, a place where different cultures blended to create something stronger and more unique. Many people grew up hearing that message proudly, in classrooms, in media, and in their communities. But figures like Matt Walsh reject that vision. They prefer an exclusionary version of America, one built on sameness rather than diversity. In their worldview, difference becomes a threat, not a strength. They distrust immigrants, other religions, LGBTQ communities, younger generations, and anyone who challenges their cultural expectations. It's patriotism defined not by shared principles, but by boundaries and resentments. This is why the question of who is more American becomes so powerful. Is it the person who supports democratic processes, pluralism, and constitutional freedoms, or the person who defends authoritarian movements, embraces symbols of the Confederacy, and pushes the idea of a religious hierarchy? The contrast forces a reevaluation of what patriotism truly means. The most striking observation is that many claiming to love America seem to hold deep contempt for most Americans. They reject the very diversity that defines the nation's identity. They resist any evolution in culture and cling to an imagined past that never fully existed. By reframing the conversation around values rather than labels, Hasan delivers the most decisive argument of the entire exchange. American identity isn't defined by uniformity. It's defined by the ability to coexist. And when measured against that standard, exclusionary nationalism falls apart. This closing perspective doesn't just counter Walsh, it challenges the entire ideology he represents.